Live. Today, I am very happy to introduce Chiara Condello from the Romagna region of Italy. Welcome, Chiara. How are you doing?
Hello, thank you. Very well. Hello, everyone. Yeah.
It's great to have you here. Before we really dig in, I wanted to tell everybody a bit of the background of how I first met you. I think it's actually a pretty cool story. Yeah. So for everybody here, just so you get a little bit of an idea of Chiara's background and what she brings to the picture is she is a producer of Sangiovese wines in Romagna, a region that if you study Italian wine, you read about Romagna and Sangiovese being a very large part of their culture there and their history there, but it's not so often from the collector standpoint, the speculator standpoint, that Sangiovese from Romagna is considered to be something that they should be really paying attention to. But that's incorrect. They absolutely should. So when I met Chiara, this was a few years ago at the Clisione Wine Festival in Piemonte. So Clisione is a large music, art, and wine festival. The wine portion hosted by your friend, my friend, Chiara's friend, Ian D'Agata. And for wine pros that attend this event, this is not necessarily an event of, walking tent to tent, slowly sampling wines. This is like wine pro boot camp. You would start at 9 o'clock in the morning. They would be seated tastings. The producers would be there. You could talk to them. You give them constructive criticism. They would give you histories. But we're talking about day on day on day of tasting, flight after flight after flight of wine. And when a wine stands out and a producer stands out, it really like resonates with everyone. And that is exactly what happened with Chiara. There we were in the large tasting room, some 20 glasses of Romagna Sangiovese in front of us. And as we're working through it, we come to a glass and you could see the entire room as faces lit up, as everybody put that same glass to their nose, glass I happen to have in my hand, not same vintage, same wine, and everybody's eyes lit up. And that was Chiara's wine. And then when she got up and began talking, it all made sense about why it was so different from everything else in front of us. And that's what she's here to talk to us about today. So Chiara, sorry to be, talking and talking and talking so much. I want to get you in here. But I really wanted to get that story out to everybody because it's one of my favorite stories when it comes to producers of Italian wine and some of the experiences from Clisione. So
yes, beautiful memory.
Absolutely. Beautiful memory. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
So Romagna, Emilia Romagna. If you could tell us, how are things in your region right now, especially with current events? How are things coming back to opening up and such?
Yeah, so now luckily the situation is improving a lot. So from last Monday, we were able to reopen everything. So now all the activities are open with the exception of like big events. So people are still not allowed to be together in big groups, but at least they are now allowed to travel all around the region without any specific authorization, and they are free to go back to restaurants, bars, shops. So life is little by little starting going back to normal, which is good because we have been locked down for about 2 months. So actually we were missing a little bit our normal everyday life, even if personally I didn't really had a big change because it was always allowed to go to the vineyards and work in the vineyards and in the cellar. But anyway, greatest part of the activities were totally stopped. So we are now happy to can go out again and start living a normal life, of course, with some things that we have to pay attention at, but at least we are free to move and to go back in all the Emilia-Romagna. And then from the 3 of June, it is supposed to be free again to move also in other regions, and borders of Italy will be reopened again. So that's the latest news. things should go in that direction. Actually, it's true that now greatest part of Italy has a very big decrease in terms of sick people, and so that's a very good sign. Like in my province yesterday, in the entire province, there was just 1 new case.
That's
so
beautiful.
That's very good. Yeah,
that's
very
really
good news.
And also, I'm really glad to hear about the whole June 3rd date. I'm sure you are very much looking forward to seeing Giampiero again.
Absolutely.
For people that don't know, Giampiero is her boyfriend who is in Piemonte. He works at a restaurant called Il Centro.
Il Centro, a Priocca, yes.
And I was fortunate enough to meet him and with Chiara a few months back. And one of the last groups of people I actually managed to spend a little time with right before this whole thing came to be. But really quick, before we jump into wine, one thing I want to talk about really quick, because I think you know that I'm really into the food and everything like that. And when I first started researching Italian food, one thing that I was taught is that the foods of Emilia are what most average Americans could probably closely compare to what they think of as Italian American food. Sauces, casseroles of things like lasagna, baked ziti, anything Parmesan, things like that. But I was always wondering, because, Emilia Romagna, it's one region, but really it was two very different regions put together, correct?
Yeah.
So how does Romagna differ from the Emilia side? Especially from the cuisine side, but also if you could talk a little bit, maybe even about just like the landscape as well.
Yes, of course. So first things to know is that Emilia-Romagna is like quite a big region. It goes almost from very close to Milan on west till the Adriatic Sea on east. So of course, it's quite a big region with many differences inside. And that's also one of the big beauty about Emilia-Romagna, is the fact that it's a region that has the sea, so the Adriatic Sea, together with also the mountains, because we have all the Apennine mountains that are dividing actually Emilia-Romagna from Marche and from Tuscany. So we are in a region that is actually characterized by very different landscape, and also it is, as you said, divided a little bit in two. So there is the Emilia side, which is mainly west from Imola, which is close to Bologna. So let's say west side in the direction of Milan is Emilia, while east side, so in the direction of the Adriatic Sea, is Romagna. As you said, most people know about Emilia because of the products, the traditional products like Parmigiano Reggiano, Prosciutto di Parma. Parma is a very important city for the gastronomy in Italy, but also all the other cities in the region. But the same is Romagna. So Romagna is as important as the Emilia. A very nice thing to know about the Romagna is the fact that Pellegrino Artusi, who wrote the book, so The Science in the Kitchen and the Art of Eating Well, which is a mainstream, like a very important book for the Italian cuisine, containing all the recipes for the Italian cuisine that has been written more than a century ago, was born in Forlimpopoli, which is actually a very tiny village close to where I am, so close to Predappio, and it is also the city where I was born. So I'm double attached to the city because it's also my hometown. But Pellegrino Artusi wrote this book about the kitchen in Romagna, and actually wrote the book because he thought it was missing a very important, like people didn't know a very important aspect of Romagna, which is their cuisine. And the kitchen of Romagna is characterized by being a house kitchen, so homemade food. So if you come to Romagna, you will be welcomed by many restaurants and many places that made a lot of home style, homemade food. And so that's one of the characteristics. Another, there is a big fight in between Emilia and Romagna about the way we produce the pasta.
Oh, the pasta's a big thing there, that's for sure.
Yeah, so in Emilia, the most famous pasta is maybe the tortellini, that are very, very small, the field pasta, while in Romagna we do the cappelletti, which are actually bigger. And not only the dimension, but also the way the pasta is filled, like in Emilia is more based on the meat, in Romagna it's more based on the ricotta cheese. So many difference, and we are continuous arguing about who is doing like the actual real one, etc. So there is different, mainly to talk about generally, let's say that the Romagna cuisine is also influenced by the presence of the sea. So we are not far from the sea. So there are many dishes, traditional dishes that are characterized by the sea as well. And also we have the mountains. So we also have many mushrooms and products from the mountain, and also the truffle in autumn. Yeah.
I was wondering actually from the pasta standpoint, and everybody please forgive me, I know we're here mainly about wine, but we'll get this out of the way. From the pasta standpoint, is there a difference in the pasta production between the Emilia and the Romagna section, considering how much closer you are to the Adriatic? And I only mention that because another region that's very proud of their pasta would be Abruzzo. Mm-hmm. And they're always talking about how their relative distance to the Adriatic Sea really affects their pasta and the flavors. Is that something else? That's something as well that you see in your region?
Yeah. Let's say that we have also the way we produce the pasta and the way we cook the pasta, and also the sauces that we use. In Romagna, there are many sauces that are characterized also by the presence of both some mussels, for example, together with something from the land, while in Emilia is not like this. Like Emilia is mainly from land. Yeah.
Pasta con le sarde. Okay, so now I swear, but we're going to bring this
midday in the States. Yeah.
First, before we bring it in, questions, guys, if you have them, send them. Even if I don't get to them immediately, I'll get to them as they start to, work in with our conversation here. So please do make sure to send them as early as you can so I can try to keep track of things like that. Okay, so Chiara, the main event here, the reason why we're here, Sangiovese Romagna, and what you've been doing there. First, what I'd like you to do is give us a little bit of an idea of where you're coming from, because I know your family has been involved in winemaking for quite some time, and that's where the whole thing started. But if you kind of give me a little bit of history of your family and how you came to start your own label.
Yeah, so, well, mainly I was born in the vineyard. The beginning of everything is that I was born here in the countryside. So I grew up in the middle of the vineyards because my grandfather used to make wine. And actually, my grandfather used to produce Sangiovese, but as a little farmer. So like how many grandfathers of my generation used to do in Italy at that time. So he had the vineyard, he was taking care of his vineyard by himself. He was just producing Sangiovese, so nothing else, only Sangiovese. And I was going together with him in the vineyards since when he was a child. He didn't have just the vineyards, he also had some like cherry trees, some peach trees, some grain. But the vineyard was like important one for him. And so he always bring me to the vineyard. And also I remember that when there was a harvest and I was a child, it was like a very happy time because it was allowed not to go to school for those days. So for me, it was also the moment when I could join my grandparents in the countryside and just go together with them to pick the grapes and vinifying. And my first memories linked to wine are those linked to my grandparents. So being in the vineyard together with them, being at home with them. So I grew up with them and we always had a bottle of wine on the table. It was like wine part of our everyday meal. Lunchtime, dinner time, there always was a bottle of wine. And as a children, of course, I was not allowed to drink wine, but I was allowed to have, for example, a little spoon of ricotta cheese with a drop of wine on that, or a few drops of wine in the glass of the water. So let's say that everything started there. And from my grandparents, from my grandfather, I think that I took some important lesson that I will then find later in my job. But then I did something totally different. So my first graduation was in economy. So I decided to do something different. I studied international management. I moved to Milan. I lived in Milan a few years. And then after graduating, I've decided to actually come back to Predappio, so where I am when I was growing up. and to start helping my father in the vineyard, because in the same time, like we don't own anymore the vineyard of my grandfather. Like when my mom and their sister divided the things, the vineyard stayed to my aunt. So I'm not working the same vineyards of my grandfather, but my father started at the same time another winery. So when I graduated and I decided to come back to Predappio, I started working in my family estate in Predappio, and I started really seeing a winery as a work, because before it was not a work. Like when I grew up, it was just the everyday life, but not really also like my work. And then I started to work in my family estate, which is located in Predappio, which is called Condello. And I started helping the team that was already there, because it was already an established winery. So I just entered in the team and I started working together with them in the vineyards, in the cellar, and following everything, because it's a family business. So I just started from there. Then in 2015, I've decided to start also my own little winery. So also in Predappio, which is actually called like me, so Chiara Condello. I started my own little winery basically because I find some old vines. So I found some old vineyards that I actually wanted to take over and take care of. And I decided to continue working in my family estate, but at the same time to start my own little project, so my own little winery. And so I started producing wine under my own name in Predappio with my vineyard. So now you see, you've shared the screen of the map for the Romagna Sangiovese. So you can actually see where Predappio is, where we are located. To understand the wines of Predappio, you can see from the map that we are right in the middle of the DOC Romagna Sangiovese, so right in the heart of that, exactly in the appellation Predappio, which is just the part including the brown colors fields. So just this little part. And to understand the wines of Predappio, it's important to understand geographically the position, because Predappio is located in between the Apennine Mountains that are on our back, so facing south mainly, and the Adriatic Sea. So it is in a very special position, exactly in between the sea and the mountains. So these influence a lot the climate and the characteristic of the wines of Predappio, for sure.
Well, that's a good example, because when a lot of people think of the Romagna or Emilia-Romagna region, well, one of the first ones they think of is, say, Lambrusco, but they also think of really like flat plains. And that's not what we have here in Predappio. You're really in like the foothills of the Apennines, so it's a completely different terroir. And also, your region is bordered more than any other from the south to Tuscany as well, correct?
Yeah, correct. So actually, as we talked before, Emilia-Romagna is a very big region. So of course, it includes a big variety. It includes the part of the Emilia where they do produce the Lambrusco, and it includes the Romagna side where we do produce Sangiovese mainly, and Albana as a wide variety, to be generic. The things to know is that also in the Romagna side, there are many differences. So there is the part where the MGA, so the additional geographic mention that are all on the hills. So it's not the flat part of the region. In the map that you are showing, you are just showing hillside part of the region. So the flat part is from that side on the other part. So there is mainly a street dividing the hills from the flat part, which is the Via Emilia, so the ancient Roman road.
Right.
And so where we are located, it is on the Apennine, at the base of the Apennine Mountains. So of course it's hillside, not the flat part of the region. And that's made a big difference.
Now, the vineyards of your grandfather, were they here in Predappio, or was it a different part of Romagna?
Now they were in Meldola, so it's not very far from that, but if you can see the closest valley going on the right side. Now, I don't know, because it's very small, the map, but there is Meldola written, and it was up on there. So just one valley more east. So quite different characteristic in terms especially of soils, but always a place for the production of Sangiovese.
And how far back does the production of Sangiovese go here when like historically, like well, first, how far back does it go? But how long ago was it that you feel like people were really trying to produce a Sangiovese that could rival, your neighbors to the south?
Okay, so first of all, I want to tell you that in Predappio, the first written laws that we have about wine production dates back 1383. So in 1383, we already had the written rules and regulation about how to manage the vineyard, how to harvest. So there was what the French called the ban de vendange. So people in Predappio were not allowed to pick the grapes before the council of the ancient people said that the grapes were ripe enough. And then there were many other rules. We were not allowed to buy any grapes from outside the area of Predappio. We had to have all the vineyards, like to have them closed. So there were many rules just about wine production in Predappio. So if you ask me how long is the tradition of viticulture here, it's century-old, of course. And another beautiful thing is that in Predappio Alta, so in the village of Predappio, the original village of Predappio, it's still possible to go and visit the medieval cellar, which are actually amazing. So there's a very long tradition about that. And the wines from the first things that we have, the written things that we have about the variety planted in Predappio was exclusively Sangiovese. So we have always focused on the Sangiovese. Yeah.
You have your own distinct clone of Sangiovese, right?
Exactly. So Predappio also has a kind of Sangiovese, which is called Sangiovese di Predappio. Mm-hmm. Actually, the extended name is Sangiovese Condello Piccolo di Predappio. But it is, there are clones indigenous from Predappio. And the main difference is that the Sangiovese from Predappio is with quite smaller grapes. So the dimension of the fruit is quite small, and also the dimension of the berries. So we have quite small berries. So we have a little bit more skin compared to the fruits. The skin is very important in our wines, and it gives also quite a lot of color to the wine. So in our dialect, in the past, we used to say that the Sangiovese in Predappio was called enigar. Enigar in the dialect means the black one. Mm-hmm. Because it was very rich in terms of color. So it gives wines that are very fruity and very rich in the color. And here you can see a little bunch of the Sangiovese. You can see compared to some other kind of Sangiovese that makes bunches that are, of course, bigger and much more compact. My Sangiovese in Predappio, has this sort of grapes, so a little bit more tiny in terms of dimension, and with the berry that are not so strict one to the other. They're a little bit more separate.
And now from a comparison of flavors or aromas, how would you compare your Sangiovese to, say, a Sangiovese from Tuscany or from Le Marche?
Yeah, well, so talking about the Predappio, I would say that blind, the first characteristic that I would say is really important for distinguish a Sangiovese from Predappio is the fruitiness. So it's a very fruity Sangiovese, very characterized by that. And another characteristic is linked to the tannin structure. So tannins are there, but they stay always like quite still, quite soft. They are not so harsh and as they can be in other kind of Sangiovese that are grown on different terroirs. And that's also because of the specific soil that we do have in Predappio, because we talked a lot about the fact that Predappio is in between the mountains and the sea, and the sea, the Adriatic Sea, that nowadays is actually about 20 minutes by car far, 3 million years ago used to be here. So of course, the presence of the sea has an influence on the soil and on the geology of Predappio. And we do have something that is unique from that area, from Romagna especially, but not in all part of Romagna, in some specific part of Romagna like Predappio, which is a rock called spungone. Okay. So spungone means big sponge.
I'm glad you brought this up because I remember us talking about this last time. And it was, please continue.
Yeah, so spungone is this kind of rock. It's white rock. Of course, the spungone is like, as you can see from the name, is a big sponge. So it seems like a big sponge. And of course, it is characterizing because it is a rock that originates 3 million years ago where there used to be the sea here. So it's a rock made of calcar, corals, what it used to be corals, shells, and it is giving the characteristic to our soil. Then it depends on how present it is in the different parcel to affect the parcel more or less, depending if it is like the roccia madre. I don't exactly know how to translate that, but if it is the entire rock, which is on the surface, like for example in Le Lucciole, so in my parcel of Sangiovese where I produce Le Lucciole, or if it is a little bit more into the soil, so together with the clay, for example. Yeah.
That's one. A little visual aid, Le Lucciole. We'll talk about this, guys. Sorry, please continue.
So, of course, when the rock is more present, it has a higher effect on the characteristic of the soils and of the vines. When it is together with the other part of the soil, it is a little bit less influencing in the term of the final wine, of course. But the spungone is this very important rock to understand the production of wine in Predappio, why Predappio made wines that are slightly different. Another thing is that it's true that Predappio is a unique MGA, so the appellation is Predappio, but also inside the appellation Predappio, there are many differences. There is the lowest part of the valley where there's more sand in the soil, the part where I am, where there is more spungone, and the upper part where there are already more marne in the soil, because the appellation has also different altitudes. So yeah, that's a rock of spungone. So you can clearly see. So of course, you can see how it is affected by the sea. You can clearly spot the fact that it was a rock originated by the sea. And it is present in Predappio, in Castrocaro also, which is the closest valley. And you can find it also a little bit more in the direction of Faenza and of Bertinoro. For example, there's another producer, Cristina Gimignani, who is doing a wine which is called Pietramora. Pietramora is the name of the spungone because after a while that it is exposed to oxygen, it turns a little bit more on black. So it becomes a little bit more dark. And so that's the reason of the name Pietramora.
Yeah. Amazing. So really quick, because I have a question from here as well that I want to ask you from somebody, but also I wanted to mention everybody that, so one thing that Chiara had mentioned is she mentioned the clone having more like a fruitier clone. Don't mistake that for it being a quote unquote fruity wine. The fruit is there and it's present and it's brilliant. But what's really amazing about these wines that I find is the combination of acidity and minerality. The minerality that I find in Chiara's Sangiovese is absolutely amazing. And it really just sets the stage for the entire performance of the bottle. But I have a question here from Richard Peterson. He's asking, is acidity consistent with other Sangiovese clones, such as, say, Sangiovese Grosso?
Yeah, I would say yeah. Then, of course, the acidity is influenced also by the vintages. Now I think that one of the changing thing that we are experiencing in Romagna, but we are experiencing all around Italy, is the fact that we are going in the direction of always a little bit more warm vintages. Right. So that's also one of the things that for us is also the challenge of the future. For example, I have my vineyard exposed to northeast, the greatest part of them, and nowadays I'm very happy about that. But maybe if I was talking with my grandfather, he would have not been so happy about having northeast vineyard exposed 30 years ago. And in fact, I just find, for example, papers of my grandfather a few years, I would say about 30 years ago, note of the harvest. He was actually picking the grapes mid of September, end of September, and the alcohol was lower. The wines were a little bit more light. It's true that he's also in a different area, no, it's not exactly here. But anyway, harvest was a little bit postponed compared to what we are on average doing now. So for sure, also talking about vintages, it's important to see that what we are experiencing now compared to what it used to be in the past is that we are facing a much stronger events. So strong winds, strong rain, peak of heat, very cold winter just in some days, and especially at the end of the winter, which is the most critical, of course, because of the spring frost that can be a problem. So everything is changing, and I think that for me as well, it's quite important to be able to understand that changing and to adapt my way of working on that. And that's for sure one of the challenges for the future, trying to adapt everything to vintages that can be dramatically different one from the other, even if they're close one to the other.
So the vineyards that you have, though, you didn't plant these vineyards, correct? You purchased these vineyards?
Yeah, I took them over. I had the chance to find some old vines or vineyards that are 40 years old.
40 years old.
Yeah, actually, it was funny because everything originates because some neighbors want to take out the vineyards because they were not producing a lot anymore. The people from whom I bought these previous vineyards were not just making wine, they were making wine, but they were also doing different jobs. So for them, the fact that the vineyard was producing more was quite important. While for me, it was just the big chance to have an old vineyard and to start working an old vineyard. Mm-hmm. So I actually started working these 40 years old vineyards. I'm lucky because in the recent years, they were already worked organic as well from the Vinous owner, even if not certified, but I know them, I've seen how they have worked the vineyards in the previous year, so I always know how was their approach to the vineyard. And so yeah, the chance to purchase this vineyard that you can visually see that are different from the vineyards that we have today. So plants are a little bit more far one from the others. And the plants themselves, they are very wise. So they don't produce a lot. Mm-hmm. They have a small production, a very balanced canopy. So the plants are already at a level where they are a little bit auto-regulated themselves. Yeah.
So I have a good friend of ours and of Vinous, Manuel, asking about their two different bottlings and if they are both coming from the same vineyard. So I just want to show everybody too, because we didn't look at it yet. But what I'm actually sipping today is the Romagna Sangiovese Predappio 2016, which is Chiara's, I mean, call it, entry level bottling, but stands, shoulder to shoulder with some of the best top Chianti Classicos that I've had. And then also her higher end bottling. So Manuel's asking, what is the difference between the fruit, the sources for the fruit of these two wines?
Yeah. So first of all, I just produced these two wines. So everything stays very, very simple. And they are both Sangiovese 100%. So I just grow Sangiovese. The difference is that the vines that I use for producing the Predappio, so the first bottle, the Chiara Condello, are vines that came from 3 different vineyards. Exactly. So I use 3 different vineyards that are all in Predappio, but that are actually planted on slightly different kind of soils and at a different altitude. So I have the lowest vineyard, which is close to the village at 150 meters above sea level. And then I have the second vineyard, which is in between, and the highest vineyard, which is actually at 360 meters above sea level. So quite different. And the other thing is that also the soil where these vineyards are planted are slightly different, because they are on a clay base, but the upper vineyard is planted on soil that are very deep. So fresh soil is, of course, the last vineyard that I usually pick. Then there's another vineyard planted on red soil, so always clay, but with much more iron in the soil. And the third vineyard, which is the lowest one in terms of altitude, which is actually planted where there's more calcar, so clay, but white clay with more calcar and with the spungone rocks that rise. And the difference of these 3 vineyards compared to le lucciole, the reason why I do produce le lucciole from just one vineyard, is the fact that le lucciole parcel is actually a coastal side. So it's a vineyard that is a sort of S shape, and it's characterized by the spungone, so by the rock. It is a rocky soil. In the upper part, the spungone is on the surface. So it's, of course, a very poor soil, very tough, that makes the life of the plants very hard. And so plants are producing very little amount of grape in the upper part of le lucciole parcel. And of course, the grapes have an highest complexity. And then in the lowest part of the parcel, the spungone is always there as a big rock, but a little bit more deep. So you also have a part of the soil which is a little bit more rich. And so that it is the part that produces grapes that are a little bit big, a little bit more generous, even if it is the Sangiovese Piccolo, so you don't have to expect very big bunches. But anyway, compared to the upper part, they are a little bit more gentle, a little bit more big. So the combination of these two has a very strong identity. And that's the reason why I use them for producing one wine, which is the expression of that specific parcel. And which is characterized, of course, by the rock, the spungone.
And the Lucciole is technically a Reserva, correct?
Yeah, it is, as appellation, it is a Riserva. So for sure, it has also different time of aging. But my idea, the base was like, my idea in making wine is the fact that I want to produce wine that are a pure expression of the land where they come from. So for me, there was some common points in between the 3 other vineyards in terms of grapes, in terms of wines that they produce. And I thought the occasion to put them together, to have a nice picture of what it is Predappio, so the characteristic of the Predappio, and also the 3 vineyards, I think that compensate a little bit also in the vintages. So maybe in a warm vintage, there is a vineyard which is a little bit more producing. In a cold vintage, the other vineyard is supporting a little bit more. So that's the idea of the 3 vineyards blended for producing the Predappio, while Le Lucciole stands out by itself. It has a totally different complexity. And so I thought it was fair enough to give that specific parcel its own identity and opportunity to stand out. And of course, also give them the opportunity to age a little bit more compared to the previous wine.
Well, I can tell you they're both gorgeous, everyone. I mean, it's you know, with the Predappio is a beautiful, beautiful wine that I would take any day. But then this is ready to be put in the cellar, if you prefer, for 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, if not more. I know your first vintage was 15.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we don't have the track record yet to show from your specific winery, but from tasting this wine, I mean, it really tempts, like, you know, it's an intriguing wine. It really just makes you want to put them in the cellar and watch it as it matures. They're absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we didn't mention about Predappio. It is that it's producing wine that has a potential for aging, which is quite long. Of course, I cannot say by my own experience, because as you said, I don't have so many old vintages to prove that. But I was lucky enough to have some bottles of old wines made in Predappio by other producers. And I remember clearly that we tasted together with some other producers and some Italian journalists. We had the chance to open and taste some Sangiovese from Predappio 1930, and they were amazing.
Yeah, I mean, just on the balance alone of this wine, it's going to mature beautifully. You can just when you taste it, you can tell.
Yeah, and that was also one of the things that really pushed me and say, I want to produce wine from here that can take out that opportunity and to express these.
We have a couple questions here that are really great. So I want to actually get some of these. Number one, there's apparently a lot of very thirsty people because I have, well, first, I have Rishi asking if there's going to be more of the 2016 Le Luce released into the market.
No.
How big is the production on that?
The production of Le Lucciole is about 4,000 bottles in a year, more or less. Plus, I always do some Magnum. So I like Magnum. So I do them all by hand at the beginning. So we don't have a fixed amount, but depending more or less on the vintage, I also do that. But unfortunately, Le Lucciole 2016 is over.
It's gorgeous, guys. Get it while you can. And then from Jack Callahan, he's asking, he's asking if your wines are available nationwide in the U.S. He lives in New Orleans, which he feels is a very wine-friendly city, and I think he's looking to find some of your bottles. Are they available in New Orleans?
Not yet, I have to say. So, as we said, I just started selling my wines a couple of years ago. So I have a few states covered in the States, but not yet New Orleans. Yeah.
And then
so we will operate for that.
I have a really great question here. Kevin is asking us if you can tell us where the name Le Luce comes from.
Okay.
Well, let me show the label to everybody one more time as you tell us, right? Because I think this is connected in some way. So please go.
Yeah, so Le Lucciole, first of all, the meaning of the word Le Lucciole means fireflies. So you know the little insects that are making a light, and that are insects that are actually not living in places where there's pollution. So they really require a pure air to survive. And so that's the meaning of the name. But actually, Le Lucciole, the other characteristic is that Le Lucciole are just present for a very short period of time during summer, and it is usually when we cut the grain. So the air has a very specific smell in that period, which is very, very beautiful. And actually, this smell, I was finding it in many Sangiovese that I love to drink. Not necessarily from Romagna, but also from Tuscany or from other part of Italy. And I find this perfume in all this wine. And so I was at a preview of Benvenuto Brunello many years ago with friends, and I was telling them if I will never make a wine that is really satisfying my idea of Sangiovese in terms of what I wanted, what I'm searching for in a Sangiovese, I will call it like this because of this link for me with the good perfumes that I was spotting at that specific moment in the wines that I loved more. So that was the beginning. And then the vineyard itself, that's another main reason, is that the vineyard itself is planted with the wood on the back. So there is a big wood. And so Le Lucciole are staying there because there's a very pure environment. That's another aspect of my vineyards. They are all surrounded not only by other vineyards, but also by forest. So this is, of course, having a huge impact on the biodiversity of the place and on the vineyards and on the wines, of course. Yeah.
So, okay. So before we get into more of like vinifications, that's another thing that we want to talk about a little bit. I really wanted to ask you, because I don't know if anybody noticed, I was like intently staring in this direction. And for me, that what I'm looking at is I'm looking at those bottles behind you on the shelf. And I'm wondering, what are the wines that you drink? What are the wines that you search for? What are the wines that when it's not Sangiovese, it's not Romagna, what are you drinking?
Well, so I like drinking, so I like to taste wines made from different places, different producers. I would say that in general, I like wines that are really taking out the uniqueness of the place where they are born. And I tend to love wines that are like monovarietal in general, but it's just really to give a big picture. Of course, I like wines that are, for me, respecting these ideas, and so I love to drink Sangiovese. That's for sure. I love Sangiovese. I have many producers of Sangiovese that are my actually mainstream like wines that I always loved to drink. But then, with the exception of that, I like to move north, so going to Piemonte, for example, having some good Nebbiolo, or moving even a little bit more north and arriving in Burgundy. I love Pinot Noir, but it's really a tough question, because I think that I drink also really very different wine. It depends also on the occasion, on the climate, on the day, on the mood. Sometimes I just want to drink something easy, something fresh. Some other time I prefer a wine that maybe needs much more time to be open, to be understand. So of course, let's say that my love, my heart usually skip a bit with Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, and Pinot Noir. Yeah, but it's not the only one. I have many wines that I love.
Anything from the United States you enjoy? Don't worry, you won't offend us.
No. I'm not so knowledgeable. I had some wines, of course, that I love, but I'm not so knowledgeable about United States wines. I want to come over and discover more. I haven't so far had the chance to visit any winery actually in the States. So that's actually, it was in my plan for this year. Maybe I have to postpone it a little bit, but it is on the list. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure many people are going to be very happy to welcome you when the time comes for you to visit and start tasting around.
And I'm open to have like suggestions about cellar that I have for sure to taste. Also, another reason is that in Italy it's not easy to find bottles from the States. It's not so easy. So that's another thing, which is, it's quite easy to find wines from France, wines from Spain, for example, but it's not so easy to find United States wines yet.
Right, I can imagine. We're gonna have to correct that next time you come over here, that's for sure.
Exactly. Next time you're gonna do just United States wines tasting.
There you go. There you go. No, there's some really great stuff here. If you like Burgundy, there's a lot of really exciting things going on in Oregon right now. So
yeah.
I mean, and from a white wine and a red wine standpoint. So I think there's going to be a lot of stuff you're going to like. Really quick, I have a question here from Richard. He's asking about the 2017 vintage. So he has apparently just gotten his 2017 Romagna Predappio, and he's wondering about when Le Lucciere 17 is going to be released.
So Le Lucciere 17 is going to be released on September 1st. It is a Predappio Riserva, so by law, it needs to be aged at least 3 years in the cellar before being released. So we need to wait until September. It is already bottled, and it is actually the wine that I'm drinking now. I opened a Lucciere 2017 because I was not tasting it for a few weeks, and so I took the occasion to open and drink it. I'm enjoying this wine, but it's still aging in the bottle, and it will be released September the 1st. Yeah.
Super. Okay, so before we talk about vintages, because that's certainly something everybody wants to know about as well, what I did want to talk about really quickly is what is the difference, the vinification when it comes to your two different bottlings? How do you treat them differently in the cellar and in the winery?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't treat them differently in the vineyards. So I don't make any difference in between Le Lucciole and the other vineyards. I'm convinced that it is the vineyard itself that has the difference already inside her. So of course, Le Lucciole is producing grapes that are more complex. And so then once I have the wines in the cellar, I just work trying to take out that natural characteristic that they have themselves. So I do for all wines indigenous yeast fermentation. What changes is the fact that on Le Lucciole I do usually longest maceration compared to the other wines. For example, we talked about vintage 2016. 2016 was an incredibly beautiful vintage in terms of skins, and it was a vintage that allowed me to do quite long maceration. So I did on Le Lucciole 45 days of maceration with the skin, while for the Chiara Condello, so from the 3 other vineyards, it was about 25 days, 30 days of maceration with the skin. Then, of course, the other 3 vineyards, they are 3 different entities, so I do vinify them separate. So it's not, that's an average, it's not that everyone is exactly following that. So let's say that on average, I do longest maceration on Le Lucciole compared on the Chiara Condello. And then on Le Lucciole, I also do some entire grape fermentation. So I do the vinification together with the stem, not 100%, but according to the characteristic of the vintage, I change a little bit the amount of stem that I use. It is actually something that not many producers are doing from my area, but it was something very traditional for here. So if I think about how my grandfather used to vinify, he used to vinify with the stem. So he was making 100% entire grape. I'm not doing that, but he was actually doing that. So I took over that old tradition and I just tried to modernize it a little bit in a way, so making, because I don't like when you can feel too much the hand of the producer. I prefer when it is the soil and the vineyard express itself. Sorry, my dog is passing behind.
Oh, hey, we love dogs here.
Yeah, she's here.
Yeah, but it was a shepherd dog you have?
Yeah, she's Rhea. I don't know if you can see her.
She's shy though. Oh my God.
Yeah, she's staying here.
Oh, no, she knows she's on camera. She knows.
Yeah, she doesn't like to be recorded. Well, anyway, talking about stem, I just decided to retake over that tradition of vinifying and using not 100%, but depending on the vintage, I use different amount of stem. So what I do is that my vinification are carried out in the tine, so in the tini, in the open wood tanks. And what I do, it is, I do a first part without stem, then a little part with the stem, then another part without the stem. It's like a sort of lasagna made like this. And then, of course, it is pressed with the feet at the beginning. And then I just do very delicate punching down with the hands. And according to the characteristic of the vintage, then it depends how long the maceration will be. The other main difference in between Le Lucciole and the Chiara is the time of aging, because the Chiara Condello is aged 1 year in the big barrel, while for Le Lucciole, I keep them 2 years into the big barrels.
Beautiful. Yeah. So let's now, we are running out of time, unfortunately. You know, this always happens with these because I feel like you and I can keep on going for a much longer amount of time than we have. But could you focus on the last few vintages, since let's talk about 15, 16, and 17, since these are the 3 vintages that you have right in front of us, and your first vintage as well.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm happy you didn't ask about 2014 because it was a quite critical vintage in our area, and we got hail. So forget about 2014. Okay. 2015, at the opposite, was a very easy vintage to start. I have to say that I was quite lucky to start working in 2015 because it was a very balanced vintage. So if I have to think about vintage 2015, it was when everything arrived more or less in the right time. So winter was a proper winter. And then there was some rain during summer, but especially it was always very balanced. So plants never get on stress. They didn't have any peak of heat or problems. And that's quite different compared to, for example, what happened in other part of the region, because I know that in some other part of the region, there was some problem with the heat. It was very warm vintage. That was not here in Predappio. So in Predappio, we didn't face that problem. So it was a vintage that I would say it was warm. For sure, it was a warm vintage, but never with some critical aspect of the warm. 2016, at the opposite was, so the wines of 2015 are very balanced, very elegant. 2016, at the opposite, was actually cold compared to the 2016 to the 2015. It started before. So 2016 was a vintage that started very early. And then because we had a very mild winter in 2016. Then we had a very cold April and May. And so, of course, the temperature dropped, the vegetation slowed down a lot. And also during summer, we never had some peak of heat as well. And so it ends up in a late harvest. And also during harvest time, temperatures were very low during the night. So there was a very big excursion in between night and days, really impressive in 2016. So it was a vintage characterized more by that cold aspect, even if it was not a wet vintage. So it was cold, but always with beautiful light.
Produced beautiful wines, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vintage. 2017 was definitely warm. It's the warmest vintage that I've had so far. It's a vintage that has been characterized by really dry months, especially during summer. And the other aspect that has strongly impacted on the wines of 2017 is the fact that we had few days where temperatures were high during the day and during the night. So of course, these has characterized the vintage wines from 2017 are a little bit more characterized by the warm weather, of course. For me, it was impacting also in terms of production, because my production of 2017 is very small. For sure, and luckily, Le Lucciole parcel was not really affected by that. But on the other vineyards, I've decided not to pick one part of the grapes that were exposed to the afternoon sun, because some of them were burned, so I've decided not to pick that grapes. And of course, that has had an impact on the quantity of bottles that I was able to produce. But it was really a very warm vintage, yeah.
Well, I'm certainly very excited to taste the new vintage wines, especially since, having tasted the 15s versus the 16s, the 15s being a slightly, like you were saying, more of a warmer characteristic, that both beautiful expressions. We are like really running out of time here. So I just wanted to mention to the people who have asked questions I wasn't able to get to. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to them, but we certainly tried. Again, we could keep on going on and on together talking about this stuff for quite a long time. I just wanted to put out to everybody that the main reason why we brought Chiara on board, I think she really showed everybody the same passion for what she's doing there that she impressed upon me, and how really, for me, put Romagna Sangiovese on the map, having had many examples going back over a decade or more where they just didn't wow me, and then these wines just really, really wowed me. One thing I did notice as we were talking, and then Chiara started talking, is that the wine that I keep on referring to as the Romagna Sangiovese Predappio is referred to as Chiara Condello. So if you're looking for it, that's what you're looking for. All right. Like I said, I have the 16 here. 17 should be in the market, correct, Chiara?
Sorry, 17?
17 of this should be in the market right now, right?
Yeah, arriving,
so
yeah.
Definitely something to look for. But like I said to everybody, if there's one One thing I can leave you with here today, but before saying goodbye to Chiara, is that these are wines to look for. If you love Sangiovese, if you love Tuscany, you love Brunello, you love Vino Nobile, you love Chianti Classico, you should seek these out. You should taste them. You will be very happy with what you taste. Again, Chiara, thank you for coming on board. Is there anything you'd like to say to everybody before we go?
No, just thank you about that and about the opportunity of talk about Predapio, which is small reality, but as you said, with its own traditional, authentic kind of Sangiovese that is different from the others, but has a strong identity to be discovered. Yeah.
I think we're going to be hearing.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about your region in the years to come. Thank you, Chiara, and thank you everyone for joining us.